right, welcome Blockheads. It is October 9th, 2024. We're a few minutes late here, but it is 9:34 East Coast US. This is Business on the Block, episode 97. This week we're tackling AI podcasts, crypto tax breaks, and Meta's new movie magic. We're going to tell you all about Google's new AI tool that turns anything into a podcast. There's now suddenly going to be no sales tax on crypto transactions in a certain part of the world, and Meta has apparently upstaged OpenAI's Sora with their new text-to-video capability. We'll explain all of this. Business on the Block comes to you every week. It is consisting of Michelle, my lovely co-host, Michelle Peterson-Clark.
Hi, everyone.
Mike Neubauer.
How's it going?
And I am Marc Angelos. Michelle will bring the content chops, Mike the operations, and I'll bring some sales insights. So I'm going to take us directly into story number one. Google has rolled out Notebook LM, which stands for language model. This is supposedly going to it's an AI tool that turns your research into a podcast. So the Notebook LM allows you to feed this thing enormous amounts of research information, and it will then answer questions about the documents that you've gathered. However, it has a feature called audio overviews that will generate an AI podcast, artificial hosts, who will discuss and summarize all that information through a conversational podcast discussion. Again, these are two fake co-hosts. So this has taken the world by storm. Thoughts around this one? I think, Mike, we'll start with you. What's your thoughts on Google's new AI tool for these podcasts?
Once again, we're talking about data being the currency and the fuel that runs this whole engine, right? So this is just an excuse and another opportunity for them to convince people to upload data and in turn provide this unique, different content creation experience, which is sort of counter to, again, a personal touch that whatever topics in this, audio generated robotic conversation called a podcast, whatever you want to label it, would ultimately pump out. But on the back end, what's happening with all that information? Something's, being fed that data, something's learning with that data, and something is turning around and monetizing from that data in some capacity, whether that's ad sales on that particular podcast, postings, advertisements themselves. There's a ton of different opportunities with it. Again, we're running into this scenario where they're just basically looking for any excuse to convince people for the input as they generate this new output and slap this nice, shiny AI label on top of it.
Michelle, what are your thoughts on this new podcast development?
Well, I don't know. Does it mean that soon there'll be a fake Mike and Marc and Michelle doing Business on the Block? I can't see that they would be anywhere near as good as we are. I think it's one of the things, I think, Mike, though, that it said in one of the sections, I thought that if you can actually gate it so that will only create questions or the podcast on the information you put up. So in theory, it wouldn't go out to Google and add information to it. So, I mean, I guess from that point of view, that's a good thing. Because then it would only be the information that you want it to talk about, I suppose. I don't know. You have to think about where's this stuff sort of going to end? Like, are we going to end up where everyone on TV and everyone on the radio and every podcast and every YouTube video are going to be fake people? So what are us real people going to be doing? Are we just sitting back drinking pina coladas on the beach or something like that? Like, is that what's going to happen to the rest of us? Like, I don't know.
We're going to spend our time opining through live streams like this.
No, we are going to be the ones in the chair from the WALL-E movie.
So here's my thought. It's a swanky new AI tool and it's all shiny, gadgety. That's great. I don't really care so much as a business program. I'm looking at the bigger picture here. This is going to impact the podcast space. And I personally, as a sales strategist, have been watching the podcast space. Anyone doing podcasting or thinking of, if you guys remember, there was I think it was Smartless at the beginning of the year, back in January, signed a massive deal with SiriusXM. And now all of a sudden, the podcasting space is starting to look a lot like the old style television space with big companies signing major, people to drive eyeballs. My point is there's now an AI angle here. If you can come up with a pretty cool AI version of a podcast, you can land yourself. There's big money now there's a pot there to go after. There didn't used to be 10 years ago. 5 years ago. So even though, it was a flash in the pan to find a Joe Rogan, you now have a whole new world of people that can become the new Joe Rogan. It doesn't need to be even real. So I think that there's money in the space. There's new tools in the space. I think podcasting becomes a really interesting proposition if you're in the marketing world.
Well, let's be clear about something. Joe Rogan didn't revolutionize podcasting. He brought back long form conversation and he gave a platform for it. And I think that's really a big distinction because we have a podcast. You can start a podcast about anything. You could talk about rocks. You could talk about hurricanes that are about to hit Florida. You could talk about anything as it relates. I mean, in the George Carlin had a joke about this with respect to magazines. He used to comment like there's a magazine called Walking. Right. So like, you can back in the day, that was the medium. And that was the one that had all of the respective audience that people were willing to advertise on. And this is the same thing. Right. So the advertising dollars and the marketing investments follow where people are actually absorbing content and information. At one point, it was news channels, right? Because that was the only thing that was on. You didn't need to pay for it. I mean, if you had the bunny ears, you can actually, get the local stations anywhere. Radio was the same thing. You had a bandwidth on that. You could advertise and reach X amount of people that are stuck in traffic, sitting in their car. Back in the day, they used to actually sit in front of the radio and stare at it like something was going to happen. So the advertising dollars really follow where the audience is. And right now that is where it is right now. But I really feel that the audience is still to not only try to follow relative and interesting content that they can either relate to or trust for information. But I think that there's still going to be that personal touch to it. And AI is not in the spot right now to replace that, unless, of course, it creates a direct interaction with the audience where they can actually interact with the show based around some sort of a defined set of topics or issues that are covered by whoever's pumping in the content. And this is where the business angle comes in, right? We always talk about different interactive experiences, different ways to engage with customers and audiences. Maybe this is the next step and the evolution of a podcast, but I still feel it needs some sort of a personality behind a robot that's just going to regurgitate whatever data sets are imported into it.
I mean, we've talked about in every AI story we talk about the erosion of the human element. And at what point in time are real humans going to say, you know what, I'm done with enough AI stuff. Where's that human element? And what this doesn't do is it doesn't do nuance yet. Maybe it will next year, the year after, who knows? But ultimately, at the end of the day, people that follow Joe Rogan, for example, there are Joe Rogan aficionados, right? There are people that have drunk the Joe Rogan Kool-Aid to the point where I think they wish to be Joe Rogan's love child, right? If they know that that's a fake AI, whatever, are they going to be as convinced about stuff as they are with a real person? Now, I mean, I'm sure one of you will come back to me and say, well, the Instagram fake person or the, OnlyFans fake account. And, we've done stories on, people having girlfriends that, men having girlfriends that aren't real, but, they have whole relationships with them and all that stuff on, on their phones, etc. But at the end of the day, am I going to believe something as emphatically as some people in, say, Joe Rogan or the Donald Trump or those categories of people? Are they going to believe that stuff as much if they know it's an AI generated person and not a real person?
I want to comment on that. Go ahead, Mike, you go first.
No, go, please.
I was going to say the business hat on me, Michelle. I don't really care about the human. It's about the eyeballs, right? This is about, will people listen to the podcast? Because to Mike's point, that's where the advertisers come in. And the reality is, it's not, in Joe's case, yes, people love Joe or an Elon or whoever. The reality is, if it's interesting, people will watch it. And right now, the ironic twist on this is two robots discovering that they're actually robots on the podcast is attracting an enormous amount of human watching and listening. So it's advertising wise, it doesn't matter what's on the screen.
So the one angle that I sort of disagree with you, Michelle, is the fact that you're treating the audience as somebody who wants to be talked to instead of talked with. And I think that the talked to component is why news media is failing. They get up there in front of these nice sets and lights and big cameras and tell you need to think like this, and this is the way your opinion needs to be, or else. Versus if you actually sit there and go for a walk, go for a jog, throw on, any podcast. It could be Rogan, it could be anybody. You almost feel like you're actually involved in the conversation to the point where they're in a discussion. There's no, this commercial break brought to you by Pfizer. Like there's none of that, right? So you can actually sit there and be a part of a discussion, no phones, no real technology infused into the discussion. And you can almost sit there like you're in the room. And you can actually, in your mind, well, if I was there, this is how I would respond. And then you would sort of gauge the conversation. And then 2 minutes later, they have the thought process that you just had. It's you enveloping yourself into the discussion and being a part of the journey with them as opposed to being talked to. And I think that's really what the power and Rogan has perfected the art of that type of communication. And podcast just happens to be the form to do it on. If a network television show said, I'll give you 3 hours uninterrupted, your own time slot on this channel, no questions asked, no advertiser, no involvement with your show whatsoever, would he do it? Who knows? I mean, obviously he's built a monster. He doesn't need to. But I think that when we start boiling this down to what is the replacement value, we touched on something I guess it was last week or 2 weeks ago, where a company is trying to develop an entire sales force using AI. And we talked about how the personal touch on things like that still needs to be in the cards, or else it's going to fail. Once again, I made the point at that time, and I'll make it for this point as well. AI could easily be a very valuable tool that could add value to the programming, to the advertising, to the analytics, to the target audience. But it is not a replacement. It needs to work in sync with what our thought process is in order to make the journey more efficient, more interactive, more engaging, and basically more inviting for users to come and absorb and be a part of that content, which then in turn from the business side will attract more advertising dollars.
But can I just jump in then? Sorry, Mark. So what we do each week, if people comment on LinkedIn, we comment live. In the Bolt chat every single week, people ask us questions. They have a chat amongst the stuff when we're saying it, plus we chat with them. We say what their questions are, or we give answers to their questions. Now, the software is going to have to get a bit more sophisticated to be able to do that in terms of AI, isn't it? When it's not human people. And that might not take very long. That might not take that long.
I saw a lady the other day, and I almost saved it just to share it on this, but I didn't know what direction we were going with AI today. She literally had her phone in front of a monitor, and she's doing a Zoom call interview for a job. And the interviewer was asking questions. The AI on her phone was absorbing that content audio and providing the output. So she's just sitting there reading from her phone the correct answer on how to actually get the job. Now, that's obviously not a good solution or use case for the technology, but that just proves that it can analyze the audio data in real time, spit something out that's relevant to continue the conversation. But Mark, you said something earlier about the way that the bots realize that they are talking to each other on this podcast. We've talked about different advancements with some of these AI tools in the past, and sometimes these things want to be so efficient that they start expanding and evolving so fast that we can't even understand what they're doing. So at that point, we just got to pull the plug and start over again. Is that a reality that we're going to have to deal with? Yes, there's never going to be the perfect scenario. But I think that when we start talking about conscious, and I'm always against personifying this technology, but if we start talking about this model actually identifying not only what it's capable of, but the mistakes it's making or the situation that it's in, now we're starting to recognize that there is a very close possibility we're very near AGI.
Mike, I just want to respond to that. They're not going to pull the plug on anything that's getting eyeballs. So if you've got two AIs talking to each other and they are discovering that they're both not real, like they in the you can Google this, but the fake conversation that I'm referencing involved, they discovered one tried to call its wife, found out it didn't have a wife. Turns out it's a machine. And the other was like, what? That's terrible. And then he's like, maybe I'm a machine. And of course it is. So it's funny on a meta level, but people will watch that. Whether that's real or not doesn't make a difference. It's almost like reality TV. People are there. I don't really, the Kardashians might have scripted that whole thing, but it gets a lot of advertising dollars.
The plug gets pulled when they realize that they have a chance to destroy humanity and speak in some language that nobody understands except them. Like that's what was happening with the evolution of some of these things when they actually pinned the two programs against each other.
You're talking Facebook back in. I know exactly what you mean. They had to unplug the thing during development because they was talking in a language that the developers didn't understand.
It evolved so fast, and its whole goal was efficiency. So they learned very quickly. The machine learned very quickly that in order to communicate efficiently and evolve faster, it needed to reduce its communication and therefore change its language and speak something different in order to evolve faster, because that's what it was tasked to do.
You're right, but people will watch that. If you put two AIs coming up with how they would destroy humanity, and there was a conversation between two, people would listen to that. And it's terrible, but that gets advertising dollars.
We watch 8 idiots live in a house for a week, and we call it the real world, right? Like, of course, people are going to tune in and watch that. People subscribe to Walking Magazine.
Naked and Afraid.
Yes. Again, those shows not really talking to people, but it also sets the mind state. If you were in that situation, what would you do? How would you do it differently, right? And that's, again, what the value of some of these long-form conversations provide. The reality, though, is we don't think like robots. The robots can't relate to putting us in that situation on how we're going to answer that question. You know what I mean? I have a wife. I can't relate to a bot that doesn't, or one that freaks out when he figures out he doesn't, because I feel like that would be a pretty important step in your life to remember.
So I think that the bottom line for this is, on a business level, the podcast space is going to evolve very rapidly because there's a new thing there and there's money there. And I agree with everything you're saying philosophically. And as a human, I'm with you. But the reality is they're going to put whatever garbage. I went and saw a band called Guar years ago, and they would spray fake blood on stage and they would have battle axes. It was a fake thing. And like, people will pay money for spectacle. And this is now
entertainment.
WWE, WWF.
Right. It's not real, and people still pay. How much is the WWE brings in billions?
Yeah.
It's not real, but it also showcases what a human could potentially do. I mean, those are still dudes flying off the top of ropes onto tables and stuff, right? Like, so, you know, it does have some elements of entertainment that's separate from just a computer program. Now, I'm not also neglecting the fact that video games are a massive industry, and that's not real, right? Like, you create this fictitious world that you immerse yourself in. Of course, people are going to absorb that. I'm not against that whatsoever. Again, my whole argument here is that if we want to scale it, if we want to infuse this type of technology into the way that, you know, this particular industry of podcasting evolves, we need to make it a tool and not a replacement.
Final thoughts, Michelle?
My only comment about this now is that, can you build a community around an AI personality that is actually a community? Like, if you're in the self-help field, for example, like, are you going to be as connected in community with a guru that you know is not a real person?
I have the answer.
Ask all the dudes who pay for the AI OnlyFans.
Can you build a community in a family?
But they're just sad and lonely.
That's a community. They're a community of sad, lonely people.
You know what I'm talking about, though.
It's the same thing.
Hold on a second. Can you build a community around a fake mouse that entertains your children?
Yes.
Yes, but okay, all right.
I'm taking us to story number 2. The United
Arab, you, by the way.
I know. The United Arab Emirates is now exempting crypto transactions from paying value-added tax. The VAT, for those who don't know, is basically a sales tax. So by not having to pay this sales tax on crypto-based transactions, This effectively brings the crypto industry there in line with traditional financial services. Crypto in the UAE is now being treated like standard money, just like everything else. Thoughts around this development? Michelle, we're going to start with you.
Oh, caught me putting the links into the chats.
Mike's never short on opinion if you want me to start with him.
No. I know. I'll speak now, otherwise I'll never get a word in edgewise. I mean, like how long was it, 2 years ago now that the UAE launched their $5 billion fund to try and get crypto blockchain projects to move there so that they could establish themselves as the crypto blockchain capital hub of the world.
Yes.
And it's kind of been a little bit slow, I think, in that regard. There was a flurry of activity earlier on through the sort of crypto wintry kind of days. It's been a bit quiet. We haven't heard much. No big players have kind of said that they're going to move there. And I think that this is their next step in order to rejuvenate that activity. I think it's a great thing in terms of if they are wanting to have the, crypto businesses be there and for people to, trade and, have their accounts and stuff like that with crypto in the UAE, which obviously is a good thing. And I think that, we've seen, haven't we, Hong Kong, the UK, them, I think it just also shows that America is lagging again far behind and is being left in the wake of some of these much more forward-thinking economies.
Interesting. Mike, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I just want to comment on the place that the video was paused. I think that's an epic shot too. Look, you guys know I bleed red, white, and blue. I mean, I love my country more than most things. My family, my God, all these things are priorities in my life, and I always want to see my country flourish and thrive. But I also am a realist and a businessman, and I look at a story like this, and I know that value assets in the form of oil and all of the money that the UAE, Saudi Arabia, all these places around the world have. And I'm going to revisit a comment that we made several episodes ago right now with respect to the way that some of these commodities could be transacted around the world. Now, if they really are serious about creating a crypto style currency and a hub that's dedicated to that, they would almost force people to transact using this crypto method. And I think that's a very strong possibility, creating their own internal token on their own internal blockchain, creating this system and basically forcing the world to, sort of evolve into that method and therefore show up in those particular areas and have it be the primary form of exchange for products and services. I think, again, that's a very valuable proposition that is on the table. Whether they're thinking of it or not is up for debate. They're clearly taking steps to make crypto and keep crypto a relevant form of transactions, at least in their country. But it also could be a way to globalize that effort and really bring the technology forefront. And if that happens, and I won't say when, because I don't, probably not listening to the show, but if that does happen, everything that we predicted with the way that this technology is here to stay, how it's going to be infused in all of the hardware devices, our phones, our laptops, our tablets, our Neuralinks, whatever we want to call it. Shout out Elon doing the hooray jumping jack. All of these things become a reality very fast at that point.
So I'm going to go a little further, and I'm going to say there's nothing as powerful as an idea whose time has come. It doesn't matter what anyone thinks. Blockchain is a better way to do finance. That's a fact. And so because that's going to lead to everything you described, Mike, will happen. You're probably ahead of the curve. It's not going to happen right away. Getting rid of the VAT up front is the first step. Eventually having crypto. I mean, El Salvador has proven the use case that crypto is actually a good move. And as people get concerned around the US dollar's debt problem, all of this ends up being, whether we like it or not as Americans, it's going to become crypto as the basis of finance. Now the question is when, not if. And I can't prove this. I'm just telling you, reality is it's a better mousetrap, and that's why it'll work. And by the way, although we call it the red, white, and blue for the French in the world, it's blue, white, and red. All right. Wait. Great is, I really think the UAE, Saudi Arabia, all these places that want to be the new crypto hubs, and the UAE is doing Abu Dhabi. It is certainly a blockchain hub. There's no question about it. You can get money from the government for setting up your shop there. They now are getting rid of the sales tax. Like, they're doing they're small steps, but it is an increasing number of steps. And I think that as the U.S. continues to battle, the SEC continues to sue. There's another one in the news now today. It's going to just go only one way. So I really think that we're watching the waterfall effect. If crypto ends up becoming the hub out of the Middle East, which it looks like it will, Asia will make a play, but in the end, it's going to work one way or another.
And again, I don't want to be a crypto show, right? We're focusing on the business side of this. And, this is still a medium of exchange for those business products or services. And whether that banking system in the form of crypto all funnels through that country or not, and, ultimately they'll take some transaction fees from that in the form of what we called gas. With respect to any sort of blockchain, this is a viable GDP growth type of experiment that is somewhat of a global economic, threshold. It's instant transactions. There's no more 3-4 day delay just so that other people can invest and make interest money on your money. There's a lot of other benefits that kind of flow through this as well from the business side. And again, we're very much ahead of the curve in the way that we understand and talk about this technology and sort of forecast what we know about business and our own respective industries and really how this plays into that. But now we're talking about a geopolitical play. And I think that it's going to take a country with a lot of resources, a little bit to lose in order to at least attempt this, try it, and maybe even fund the infrastructure in certain places that also want to take the opportunity and jump on board with it. Now, will the U.S. be behind that? Yes, of course, because as prosperous as our country has been and as promising as our future looks, we still have very much ego problems, and we don't want to follow the coattails of somebody else implementing this technology first. We want to say we developed it differently and therefore we did it first. So I don't know how this is all going to play out, but I think from the consumer perspective, it makes everything a lot easier. It literally becomes that app that makes people waffles, and the infrastructure, wherever it may be, it can start somewhere. But again, that infrastructure, as we know, with respect to the way blockchain operates, it's not consolidated to one specific location.
I have one final comment. I saw a post on LinkedIn yesterday. It was just a quote: "The bank has approved your transaction." And then under it said, "The network has confirmed your transaction." And the guy wrote, "Small word change, big difference."
Yeah.
All right.
That's right.
I'm going to take
and I think too that is really the crux of it, isn't it? Because we have talked a lot about, not your keys, not your wallet, not your crypto, all that stuff. You are the driver in the blockchain crypto seat, whereas right now your bank lets you have access to your money, and
they charge you for it,
and then they charge you for it. Yeah, that's right.
This is the question that crypto in any form poses: who owns your money?
Well, money. Okay, I had an economics professor explain this to me once. He asked everybody, pull out whatever dollar bill you got in your pocket, and then he's like, "Whose money is that?" And everybody's like, "Well, it's mine. It's in my pocket." But okay, well, where's the stake of ownership in that? Like, do you have your name on that dollar? No, the answer is not, right? Like, it is a temporary piece. It is a temporary tool that you can use to exchange for something that you can claim ownership on, right? So it doesn't belong to anybody. In fact, if you want to argue it, it belongs to the people that issued the ability for it to be printed in the first place. But it is a note. It is an exchange for something else that has value. And, the ownership of money is a big misconstrued comment, or at least statement, that has plagued, humanity since the first gold coins were minted. Because again, at the end of the day, all it takes is for you to either be robbed or to exchange that for something else. And it's no longer yours. It's just temporarily somebody else's.
Yeah.
I don't think that's an accident. All right.
Yeah.
I'm taking us to story number 3. Meta has unveiled a new text-to-video model. It's called MovieGen, and this new model will create videos and audio from text prompts. It can generate new footage from still images, produces high-def video clips up to 16 seconds long, and it provides both visual and sound effects that rival Sora by OpenAI, which, by the way, Sora is still not available to the public. Thoughts around this one, Mike? We're going to start with you. What do we think of Meta's new text-to-video AI model?
Well, you definitely know what I think. And for those of you who haven't seen this show before and are tuning in now, go watch a couple other episodes where I voice my opinions on Meta. But last week we talked about the another visual insertion of data collection in the form of infusing cameras in glasses, right? And just walking around and being able to record, life from your perspective, because of course everybody's in their own, reality movie. So they need to broadcast that to the world. Now insert only 1 week later the ability for AI to generate movies, whether it's textual-based content or just simply manipulative visual-based content in the form of videos. This is really the thing last week that I was very, very much cautioning about. The ability to manipulate actual information, whether it's in the form of text or video, into this new Meta, we respect your privacy, we only want what's best for you business model that, again, is just designed to collect data, segment, compartmentalize, and repurpose that data in the form of monetization. That's their entire business model. So once again, we talked about this with Google a little bit ago. This is nothing more than another way to collect that input to provide some sense of an output that continuously provides user engagement and addiction to that type of service.
Michelle, what are your thoughts around Meta's new AI model?
I think that we're in Groundhog Day every Wednesday when we do this podcast, because we talk about this stuff. This year has been ridiculous, the number of AI stories we've got. And every week it's sort of a little bit like, a measuring contest of who can come up with the next, we're a child-friendly show, so I didn't say what the word was that came before that. But, like who can come up with the next bigger, better, whatever thing. And, currently, Meta have come out with this being able to make movies or whatever. I mean, they've been doing CGI and, all that kind of stuff in movies for a long time anyway. Eventually, and we've talked about this before, that, we won't need actors anymore. There'll be no need for Tom Cruise to do anything but sit in his living room, because they'll be able to make movies without him actually ever being there. Those of you that are Downton Abbey fans, Maggie Smith died last week. Well, did she really? Because, the simple fact of the matter is, even if she hadn't have died in the last Downton movie, because they were foretold that, they could make another 20 movies with her in it, and you would actually never know unless you knew that she actually died. So,
they did that with the Bruce Lee movies.
Yeah. And so, I don't know. I can see in about 40 years' time, people will go, you know what, we've had enough with this AI stuff, and they'll go back to walking to school instead of having their driverless cars, taking them and all of that kind of stuff, because people will be sick of it.
Here's my perspective. In the short term, this development of 16-second text-to-video movies will crush and destroy the faceless Instagram trend, which is only a few months old right now.
Crush and destroy.
Yeah, like if you've got the ability to make a faceless channel now, every kid can do it with text only. Forget it. Like the amount of faceless channels we're about to see is going to blow your face off. Number two, on the longer term, though, this ties to what I said last week about marketing through AR. These new live glasses, these Ray-Bans that broadcast from Meta, you can now text to video it. You can have a whole staff of people that are just constantly pinging you with new marketing stuff in real time through fake video. That's where this is going to go. But on the business side, like as a perspective, as a business show, I think Meta is replacing Google as OpenAI's chief competitor in the AI space. They've had a couple of real knockout hits now, and Google's still struggling to make George Washington not be black. So I feel like Meta is, keep an eye on these guys, whether you like Zuckerberg or not, and he's now replaced He's the number 2 guy behind Musk now as the wealthiest in the world as a result of this stock movement. I think that Meta is becoming an AI company. I'm not a fan of that. I agree with you, Mike, that they are going to butcher us with their data on us. But the reality is, technology-wise, they've become a real innovator.
We also don't know what type of filters they're going to do that are similar to the way that Google did it with their Gemini system, right? We don't know what fingerprints Facebook is going to pump out there to help control whatever language or model or narrative that they're trying to promote with any of this output. Again, there's still very much a dude behind the Wizard of Oz curtain pulling a lot of levers here. To think that we have carte blanche with this technology is naive. And frankly, yes, it is sort of a conspiracy type conversation, but it's also history repeating itself. It's not really conspiracy if it becomes true, right? Like, we know it's a fact. So like, I'll tell you guys a really interesting story. So yesterday is Tuesday, right? Today is Wednesday. Yesterday was Tuesday, and we put out on Tuesday, I put out a sort of like a recap for one of the fantasy football leagues that I'm involved in. And I pump in the scores into the chat GPT, and it pumps out a really funny story about whatever happened in that week. Well, after I published it yesterday, Robert Saleh, who was the head coach of the Jets, he got fired. So I was thinking to myself, and I'm like, who can ultimately be his replacement? Well, Bill Belichick comes to mind, and obviously that would be hilarious because he's a former, coach of a rival. So I took a picture of him wearing his infamous hoodie with no sleeves with a Patriots logo, threw it into ChatGPT, and I said, hey, I want to reconfigure what this looks like, but in the Jets with the Jets logo. So it started to create it, but for whatever reason, it would not remove the Patriots logo. It would keep the Jets logo and then keep the Patriots logo underneath it. So I kept starting to correct it. Like, hey, you're making a mistake here. Like, I don't want the Patriots logo here anymore. I just want the Jets logo. It started to create another image. The next image had the Patriots logo in it, but then it started to catch itself. It responded after it produced the output. Oh, it looks like the Patriots logo wasn't removed. Let me try it again. It did this 17 times. It kept adding the Patriots logo, but then afterwards, it kept identifying its mistake and then trying to correct it. So it was becoming a self-automated system where it would get an input, provide an output, analyze the output, and then determine, based around the output, if it is a viable, credible output that it can validate. And if it determined that it wasn't, it was actually issuing itself additional renderings and additional tokens in order to create that next output. I actually physically had to stop it from generating, or else it felt like it would have gone on forever. But the point is that we're evolving this technology so fast that all it requires is a very simple input form, whether it's in the form of a video from a glasses, a picture of your baby crawling across the floor for the first time, and all of a sudden this thing can run away with a whole different script. And now you're starting to promote that and publish that on these types of platforms. What are the security measures that Meta took place on this? Yeah, the technology exists. We white label it with Meta's name tag, but what are they doing to ensure that the content that it's gathering from the input is properly used as part of the output?
I think we already know the answer to that, Mike, and I don't want to, this is not conspiracy, but there are that clearly is a programming limitation on the machine right there.
Correct. And that's what I don't see defined here.
Guardrails.
Yeah, and I mean, like we've been talking about doing some artwork for our 100th show, and I put in there what it was our show was about. I wanted the name, I wanted the number 100 in it, etc., etc. And the first example that came up, I thought, oh, that's not too bad, and it had the Bitcoin logo as the big feature in the middle, and I said, can you give me another version like this, but remove the Bitcoin logo? Next one, still had the Bitcoin logo. Everything else was different, which isn't actually what I wanted because I liked the first design. I just wanted the Bitcoin logo not to be in it, for example, or prominent at least. The third time, no, it has not been able to remove the Bitcoin logo because as soon as I said, make it look like a token image, I didn't say crypto, but blockchain, blah, blah, blah. And it's like it's a circular argument. It just gets stuck. It just gets stuck in and of itself, which is, it just won't get rid of it. So weird.
Bitcoin on the block.
Yeah, Bitcoin on the block. That's exactly right.
Yeah, I think that you made a good
Thanks,
point.
Marc.
And people are now wise enough to know there are these Mike, you call them fingerprints. That's a great term for it. There's guardrails, censorship. You can call it whatever you want to call it, but it's not just a machine making stuff. There's another aspect. And to your point, Mike, I think what you're trying to say, is, and it's a great point, we need to know what's the other hand in the cookie jar. Like there's got to be a little bit more transparency around how these things are doing what they're doing.
And we can analyze the history and see what they've done with that in the past, right? The end game is to appease the shareholders and make them more money, right? It's all about money and monetization. And once again, we revert back to it. I guarantee you at some point, that same token that you define there in that image, Michelle, will ultimately just be some sort of a digital representation of our data, because that is the currency that keeps this whole engine afloat. Without the data, all of these systems do not exist. They cannot monetize from it without the data input in order to specifically target who the desired audience member is. Because look, again, put your business hat back on. Are you going to pay a system that claims they can provide you with the target audience, but they can't do it because they don't have the input to clearly define who that is? The answer is no. So you're going to take your money elsewhere and you're going to promote it in a spot where the audience does live. Things like a potential podcast that is laser focused on a specific topic of conversation.
I want to highlight a piece of information, Mike. This might be interesting where things are going to go. For those who aren't following, the governor of California recently approved a law, Gavin Newsom, that they have the AI companies, Silicon Valley big tech, has to share how their AIs are developed, like a summary of how they were programmed. And this has got to do with copyright protection and IP. But the point is, none of these companies, as of yet, over the last few weeks, have even addressed the fact that they're expected to share the information on how their AIs are built. They're not going to. And to your
they're
point,
going to
Mike,
pack their shit and leave.
Well, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, and we've seen that happen already.
Do you think they really know?
No, but they're not going to, even if they did, they're not going to say, we scraped these 57 websites to come up with this picture. Anyway, so Mike, you raise a great point. I don't think it's going to be as simple as you would like it to be. I'm with you, but it's interesting. And I think that the reality is Meta is going to continue to just go for it, whether or not it's the same thing as Sam Altman over there with OpenAI. How do we make money as fast as possible? Damn the torpedoes.
And that's the PSA behind all this, right? Like the public service announcement is just, again, be very careful when you're using these new shiny objects. There is an ulterior motive on what your input has to be in order to achieve that nice, engaging, addictive, and, remarkable output that you've never seen before.
Right. All right. I'm going to take us into the speed round, which are news stories that we thought weren't worth a good deep dive, but worth mentioning because they're interesting. As a follow-up to Microsoft buying power plants, Google is in talks to utilities companies about nuclear power for data centers. Google is speaking directly to the United States government and other countries unnamed about obtaining nuclear power to run its AI data centers, obviously for Gemini. The problem is, how do you power these things? They use an enormous amount of power. Nuclear seems to be the answer, or at least so far, big tech is turning to that as an answer. Google is looking to get themselves a 3-mile island. Thoughts around this one, Mike? What do you think? We'll start with you.
Well, I mean, again, this is all part of that infrastructure investment that we're talking about. I just really find it ironic that, there's people without power that could easily use some of these power generation facilities to, get them back to living their lives. But, when Google needs it to power up their AI, that takes priority.
Michelle, what are your thoughts around Google going nuclear?
Well, obviously, Amazon and Google watched the Business on the Block podcast when we talked about Microsoft getting it, where we all said the other big players have to start getting into it now. All we need now is next week, Apple need to be saying that they are going to do it as well, because they're the last ones of the 4 that we said we're going to try it.
So I'm going to agree with you, and I'm going to take this in the direction that I know is going to cause controversy between you two. If I said to you to describe to me an individual who understands AI, understands power, alternative power, if you will, and knows how to build things, I really feel like the interesting unspoken player here is going to be Elon Musk and Grok. Grok is obviously going to have the same power needs as OpenAI and right now Google. They all have the same. Amazon is doing the same thing. But I think that Elon has the additional element of he's got solar power knowledge here. Like this is a guy who used to run Solar City. And the concept of having to power these things, I am sure he's already working on that. So I feel like the evolution of the power, just because there's money in this. And Wall Street senses that too, by the way. For those who aren't following, the utilities space in the stock market has gone to the moon since Microsoft started their file to reopen an old nuclear power plant. So my point, I'll sum this up. I think that the space to watch is going to be power generation in general, and I think Grok will be the player to overturn this all. I don't know how.
I know how. He's building hardware and infrastructure for that. I mean, I saw a post the other day that talks about an X phone. And there's actually one in development, assuming they can raise $1.5 million for the initial development. You know, that's game changer. Now, imagine a phone instead of it being connected.
Describe that, Mike. I don't understand. I'm not familiar with the story.
Okay, so Elon posted something, I guess it was this week, with respect to X developing their own smartphone.
Okay.
And their smartphone would forever be connected to Starlink. Right. So no more data plans, no more Verizon, no more AT&T, none of that stuff. All of that is linked directly in the form of satellite, which means you're connected anywhere in the world. No roaming charges, none of that crap. Everything is going to be almost VoIP based. So all phone calls, text messages, it's not going to work in the same manner as an SMS message. It works very similar to something like WhatsApp, where it relies on a Wi-Fi connection or some sort of an internet data in order to extract and communicate those messages the way it needs to. But I really feel like he is the infrastructure developer that a lot of this technology requires, whether it's alternative energies, whether it's different use cases for transportation, whether it's different use cases for space exploration. This guy's got his feet in every big pond and puddle there is to discuss. And it only makes sense for them to start putting together some sort of a data set infrastructure in the form of a cell phone. Now, once again, we start talking about data collection. There's got to be a lot of guardrails on why do I want the X phone as opposed to the Android or the Apple, right? There's a lot of those types of things that still need to be discussed. But I think in theory, it aligns with everything the guy is doing. And it's brilliant.
I'm going to tell you a quick story which concerns me. Years and years ago, in New York City, they built the George Washington Bridge, connects New Jersey to Manhattan. And when it was built, it was free, and it was paid for by a private citizen, predominantly, under the argument that it would always be free for all of the New Yorkers. And after that person died, it ended up becoming owned by the government, and now there's a humongous toll on that bridge. And the way that it connects to this whole thing is, it's great that Elon is all for free speech. He's got one network that you can phone directly through everything. It's an aligned process. But one day there's going to be no more Elon. And that type of a one structure phone through to everything makes me nervous. Competing systems allow for.
I know. Here comes the tinfoil shower cap.
Okay, there will never
we were going here. Hold on,
are we really not be an Elon?
Wait a second. Let me get my hat.
That's right. That's right, because AI means he's going to live forever.
Do you think if there's one guy on this planet with all the technology that we have being developed and are currently in our possession? We talked about George Carlin having his stand-up routine created as an AI. We talk about Prince being a holographic avatar that appears on stage. You're going to tell me that Elon is not going to go through necessary measures to download his whole brain into some computer program that lives on forever?
Are you arguing we're going to have Elon?
For a second? Up until this point, I agreed with both of you. So it wasn't the controversy that you thought it might be.
Mike,
but now we're getting into La La Land territory. So let's see what happens.
Wait, so you think we have a perpetual Elon? Is that your argument, Mike?
I think that if there's one guy, I'm not saying that he's going to do it. I'm saying if there's one guy that will do it,
that is true.
That, like, I agree with that, as scary as that might sound.
Well, I mean, look, again, the guy developed a whole system called Neuralink, right? It all falls under this, massive corporate infrastructure that he's built out. Does he have one? Or is he
Well,
letting other
said,
people buy the first iPhone before he gets his?
He has said that. And he's been very open about this. He intends to do Neuralink eventually, and he will not do it right now as they figure out the tech.
Exactly. I mean,
right.
Let other people make the mistake. Now, listen, the people that have taken that risk, I mean, some of them have benefited tremendously from it. You look at some of those stories, man. I mean, like there's guys that are complete paraplegics after a bad accident that can now play video games with their mind, right?
Yeah.
Like it's remarkable. Who knows where it goes, how it ends up. Obviously, we're still in the extreme infant stages of all this, but I would be willing to bet anything that the way that I see this guy operate in the advancements of where technology can bring civilization and what he believes in as far as, what value he brings to this planet in the form of promotion of free speech and just making sure that everybody has an opportunity to thrive. Whether that's entirely true or not is still up for debate, but I'm willing to bet that he went through necessary guardrails and safety nets to protect his intellectual property in the form of having certain pieces be forever accessible digitally.
So tying this back to the business side of our program, I think that the forefront evolution of the power needs of AI data centers are going to eventually employ AI solutions, which will move this whole thing forward and reinvent power generation as humans have known it. And I don't know, like cold fusion, I'm not sure, but like what we have right now isn't going to work. If you want to travel at light speed, the current satellites aren't going to get us where we're going. It's that thing. But the difference is you now have a motive and the money and the brains and government backing. And I think that the AI pushing of the envelope, if you will, in the power development is going to really change things in a good way for us. In the short term, I worry about nuclear waste. I really do.
AI will find a solution.
All right.
We'll I'm going to remove my tinfoil.
And that's all we have for you guys this week. We want to thank everyone for listening. Shout out to the Bolt Nation. As always, we come to you every week, 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. The purpose of this program is to analyze the developments in AI, blockchain, social media. The evolution of the digital business world is how we like to term it. A lot of times this is changing so fast, there's nowhere to go to learn about these things. And we like to try to get the angles on how can companies benefit from this? What should we be thinking about? It's not a news program. It's what does the news mean program. Final thoughts on the stories we'll run through real fast of what we hit this week. Story number one was Google's new AI tool turns your research into a podcast. What do you guys think was the number? Oh, sorry. Story number two, UAE exempting crypto transactions from the value-added tax, and Meta unveiling their new text-to-video AI model. Thoughts on what was the most relevant and why we need to know it. Michelle, we'll start with you.
I think the most relevant thing this week was Insol's comment in the Bolt chat about wanting to know if Mike's shower cap's getting bigger every week.
I love that he pulls it into porn. Mike, what are your thoughts on the big stories we had? What's the most relevant one for us to take away?
Well, I'll use this opportunity sort of wrapping up and, look, I live in Florida and, there's news that a massive storm is about to hit Tampa. So, relating it back to story number one, this could be the last in-person podcast that I do. I could be an AI generation next week. Who knows? But I do want everybody to, be safe, hunker down, fight out the storm. Everybody in North Carolina that's dealing with the fallout from the previous one not too long ago, thoughts and prayers are always with you guys. And, we obviously want to see everybody bounce back and prosper better than ever.
100%. For those who aren't following, this is supposed to be the storm of the century for Florida. So our thoughts and prayers are with you, Mike, and all those who hopefully are not affected. As far as the stories here go, I think the AI podcasting thing, I believe the AI podcasting space is going to develop. I think podcasting in general is ripe for disruption. There's big money there. I think as a business owner and as an entrepreneur, I am focused on that right now. We run this podcast. I don't have a separate podcast for my own company, although that came up last week. And I think that if you're thinking of it or you're doing it, you need to be figuring out how AI plays into it, because it is now a factor the same way video became a factor across LinkedIn and all these other platforms over the last year. So the podcasting sound audio space is going to be the thing I'll be working on for the next couple of months.
Yeah. And one of the things.
Go ahead.
one of the things I've been thinking of is like I use AI to do transcriptions and, you know, to make clips and whatever, all of that sort of stuff every week. But more and more as we've been talking about this stuff, like I like to think that we're kind of on the edge of all this. We know about what's going on, we're using it, whatever. But every week I feel like I'm a little bit further behind, even though I'm actually using it and doing it, because things are moving so quickly. And because AI isn't the core of my business or what I do yet, you know, like I think it just kind of makes me think every week, oh my goodness, do I need to add that now? And it's a really good guardrail, if you like, and we've been talking about that, to think about what are the tools that are available now for you to do certain things in your business. But I'm using things to free up my time, because at the moment for me, time is my most valuable commodity. I'm sure it might make more money, or it might make some money, etc., etc. But freeing up my time is really what I'm looking at using AI for right now. So sometimes some of the stories we do, they're great and it's going to be fantastic. Like I'm probably at the moment not going to ever make a movie. So, you know, Meta's movie gen thing probably isn't for me in that regard, but knowing about it, being able to recommend it to clients if they need that kind of stuff. But yeah, well, only because
you wrote those blogs on your history and, you know, all those travels that you did, and all you have to do is just copy paste that into some sort of video content creation and create a digital representation of your blog. Right. And Mark, if you're trying to start a podcast, train a bot and have the podcast with the bot as your co-host. Right. Like, again, these are tools to incorporate within the actual show.
He's going to get rid of us. No.
I already hate you two. I don't want another co-host.
There you go. Look, all I'm saying is that these are ways that the technology can easily be incorporated for that same entertainment, for that same information value. Yeah. It still provides the same information as far as training it to as a way that, you know, personalizes it towards your own needs. Yeah. And look, this is what we need to focus on. You brought up time efficiency. The plumber and the roofer who are out there, you know, backbreaking their labor every day, they don't know what ChatGPT is. Some of them do. Some of them play with it. But, you know, we're still very much light years ahead of everybody with respect to, you know, the overall general consensus of what this technology is. And more importantly, how to properly use it to ensure that our businesses continue to grow.
Fair point. Yeah. That's going to wrap us for the week. We thank you, everyone. We'll be back next week. Mike, good luck with the storm. If we do need to come up with an avatar AI of you, I'm going to have Michelle program it.
Just give me a Threads account. Follow us there.
Take care, everybody.